One year, I decided to go trick-or-treating in my grandmother's side of town. Things went perfectly well, except for the part of the night where my family got lost for a good hour while traveling home. The adult we had present was my mom, and this year I had asked a friend to go trick-or-treating with us, so it wasn't just me and my younger brother. As we were walking home, hauling pillowcases full of good stuff, we heard someone shouting. By this point in the night, most house lights were off, because us getting lost, like I mentioned before, made us kinda late getting home. As we reached the corner of the street, we noticed we had walked ahead of my mom, so we decided to wait. We heard the scream, but clear this time. It was a man standing at the door of a dark house. We couldn't see his face, but we knew he was facing us from the sound of things he was saying. He had some candy. My friend looked at me and I decided that candy was candy, so I started to walk towards the gate of the house. My little brother had followed me, and my friend had also walked closer, but she stayed a bit of a distance. As I walked closer, I noticed two things. One, there was another man sitting on the porch of the house in the dark, and two, this house is near my grandmother's house, but I don't remember going to it at the beginning of our trip. The man who shouted started to walk down the gate, and once he reaches us, he stands really close and holds a plastic cup with unwrapped candies in it. Before I could decline, my mother walks up and shots the man a quick "no thank you" and tell us that we needed to get home now and not walk so far ahead of her in the dark. As we walked away, the man with the candy leaned over his gate to stare at us, and I feel like we had made some serious eye contact when I looked back at him. We made it home safe overall, and my mom wasn't super worried about the stranger with the cup candy, but till this day, I still get chills whenever we drive past that house. Ever since that night, I haven't seen anyone outside of the house, nor have I seen lights. I live in a subsequently normal neighborhood. I can't really say that the people here are shady. Most of them are just old. To give a little background on my town, most of the streets are parallel to each other, especially the section I live in. There's a lot of young people moving in because many of the old people in town are moving into nursing homes or unfortunately dying. I think it would be safe to say that I know most people who live in the area. Not personally, but I can recognize some faces. Last year, my friends and I decided to go out trick-or-treating one final time. We were acting like nasty teenagers who thought it wasn't cool anymore, but we had already gotten costumes and wanted some candy. However, we thought it wasn't cool anymore, but looking back, I don't think trick-or-treating isn't really safe anymore. Anyways, I had to play a field of hockey game after school, so I was itching to hang out with my friends. I finally headed home and got my costume on. At this point it was getting dark, so my mother demanded me to bring a flashlight. She's very protective and kind of strict, whereas my dad, on the other hand, is the opposite. He's more willing to let me go to places on my own and convince my mom that it would be okay if I went out trick-or-treating with a group of friends. My mom doesn't like not there being a parent around, but she knew we would stay within a couple of streets, and eventually she let up and allowed me to go. My friends began to show up at my house, but by the time we left, it was pitch black. Once again, my mother warned me about strangers. I scuffled at her, trying to shake off the embarrassment of being lectured by my mom in front of my friends. I know she was right though. Maybe a group of high school girls could take down a perpetrator, but I knew I couldn't do it myself. I stayed as close as I could with my friends for the most of the night, keeping an eye on any weird figures or killer clowns, since there were rumors of some terrorizing an elementary school a few towns over. Everything seemed to be going well, and we were having a great time. Apart from trying to avoid our classmates out of sheer humility for trick-or-treating, all of my friends and I made really good memories. Then it happened. It was around 8:45, and some of my friends were tired and wanted it to be picked up. We gradually made it back to my house, where they phoned their parents and left. I was a little upset. It might have been my inner child in me, but I wanted it more candy. I knew this was quite possibly my last year trick-or-treating ever. I wasn't ready to give it up yet. My one friend, let's call her Nancy, did not want to stop yet either. After all my other friends left, we asked my parents if I could go out for another 30 minutes or so. My mom was reluctant at first. However, my dad told her I was old enough, and most people wouldn't answer doors this late anyways, so we would be back pretty soon. It was about 9:10 at this point. Nancy and I went to the next street over in the opposite direction we went with our group previously. I remember feeling uncomfortable for some reason, but brushing it off as I just turned on my flashlight. It was pitch black, and the sidewalks are bumpy and cracked because the town was too lazy to fix them. I had a pretty bright flashlight that could shine a good 20 feet ahead of me. We made it to the next street and looked down. There were barely any porch lights on. I guess people figured little kids were done and decided that it was the end of the night. However, Nancy and I were not willing to give up and started the first house on the left. No answer. Okay. We went across the street that had the porch light on. No answer from that house either. I still wasn't willing to stop though. We tried a few houses more and got no answers. Nancy suggested we try 3 other houses, and if no one answered, then we'll go back to my place. I agreed, sadly knowing that no one would give us candy this late into the night, and that this was the end. That's when I saw him out of the corner of my eye. It was a black figure walking down the road towards the house me and Nancy were standing at. He was wearing all black with his face down and a hood over his head. Something about him made my stomach lurch. I discreetly pointed out to Nancy. She said she saw him a few houses before, just turning onto the street. This made me feel even more uneasy. Quickly, he began to approach us with his head down and his hands on his sweater pocket. Looking back, who knows what he could have been hiding in there. The street was dead quiet except for me and Nancy, so he must have heard us. I instructed for us to go to the house across the street to make it seem like we were trick-or-treating and never noticed a man. We went into the house and knocked on the door. I was secretly praying someone would answer so the man could not get near, but no one did. I was already freaking out now. I turned around and he was walking on the street in front of the house right next to us. Then I realized he had crossed the street too. A wave of panic overtook me. I grabbed Nancy's arm and sprinted to the house he had just passed. Then he circled around and began following us in the same direction. I knew I had to do something. He began walking faster and faster towards us. Nancy and I sprinted for it. There's a good amount of space in between this street and mine, but I was on track and was willing to do anything to get away from this psychopath. He didn't run, but when I finally looked back, I saw him quickly walking the same way, still with his head down. From what I could tell, he seemed fairly young, maybe in his early 30s. I didn't recognize anyone like this from the area. Nancy and I were still running though. Finally, we made it to my street, and we hid near some bushes at the end. Then I realized we still had our flashlights on, and that's how he was able to locate us so easily. We shut them off, crouched near the bushes, and waited. I knew if we tried to run to my house, he would see us. There wasn't enough time to make it there without him getting to the end of the street and seeing us. I was also terrified that he would find out where I lived. Never bring someone who is following you back to your house. Nancy and I finally saw him. He stood in the middle of the street and just peered down. I could see his eyes, as that's how close we were. They looked so blank and menacing. He knew we were somewhere, just not in the bushes only 10 feet away. After a few moments, he carried on walking. Nancy and I waited until he was on the next street, and then we booked it to my house. Later on, I told my parents, but my father only laughed and my mother looked too tired to care. My brother sat there and made fun of me for being paranoid. I'm never going trick-or-treating ever again. Who knows what he could have done to me that night, or what the man was capable of Later on the weekend, there was a news story about a child who got kidnapped a few towns away. Instead, it could have been me and Nancy. So this happened on Halloween when I was about 11. My friend and I decided to go trick-or-treating. I live in a very nice neighborhood, one of the ones where everyone gives out full-size candy bars, so it wasn't unusual to have a lot of people come there to trick-or-treat. However, that also meant that there's about an acre of front yard for each house, so it took about 3 minutes to walk between each door. It was a good night for Halloween weather-wise. Not too chilly, not rainy or anything. So it's just approaching 8:30 p.m. and after hanging around on the golf course and appreciating our candy haul, we decided to just start heading home and call it a night. The street I live on is a gigantic U shape, like a little over half a mile walk from the top of the U down the bend over to the other side. We were walking towards the end of the U further down from my house as we wanted it to take a long way since it was such a nice night. It was about 9 p.m., so no one else was really out anymore at this point, and people turned off their porch lights, the universal signal for no more trick-or-treaters. That's when we noticed a lone white van parked on the street. We made a joke about how it looks like a stereotypical kidnap van with the painted windows. That's when we noticed it shift out of park and slowly creep down the street towards us and parked at the next house. Oh, they must just have kids trick-or-treating. It wasn't uncommon for people to drive their kids from house to house, since it was a very spread out neighborhood. But given that it was 9 p.m. at night with nice weather, it struck us a little bit odd. We checked every few minutes, and it seemed to be just stopping from house to house like normal. We turned around again and kept walking at a leisurely pace, gossiping and whatnot. That's when we hear the car squeal as it moved forward down the hill and parked again. This time only about 2 houses away from us on the opposite side of the street. Again, weird time to trick-or-treat, but whatever. That's when we realized there was no kids getting out of the van. Not once. Now this was before my first phone. We were only 15 minutes away from my house, but a bit disturbed, we walked to the nearest store, rang the bell, and snuck our bags out to attempt to act normal. A woman opens the door just a crack and proceeds to berate us for trying to trick-or-treat at this hour, and slams the door before we could even say a word. We turned around, and the van was right there, parked in the wrong direction on our side of the street. The windows tinted so we can't even see the guy driving. Trying to keep cool, we casually walked away from the door and up to the street into this cul-de-sac loop that's on the side of the street that makes a bigger U. If you cut through that loop and hop a couple of fences, you can end up at my back door. The van goes the same way. Now we know he's following us, since there's no reason for him to go up this side of the street otherwise. We break into a sprint, and I am by no means athletic, but I hop those fences like an Olympian. We ran inside my house, locked all the doors, and freaked out while we sit in the front hall. Not 5 minutes later, the van slowly drives down the street past my house. We stress eating our candy, and I think what could have happened if we hadn't been aware of our surroundings. It was my turn to take my kids trick-or-treating. The previous year it was my wife's, and we trade back and forth every year. My son and daughter are aged 7 and 9. Usually I stay on the street while my kids go up to different houses and collect candy. After about a half an hour of walking around, we came into one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting, a main street in the neighborhood. Lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns, so I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl, about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked me if she could trick or treat with us, so I said sure, and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend from school. Yes, we continued, and I started to notice a large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the girl, so I tried to start some small chat with him. I said something like, "Nice weather, eh?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me, while our kids went up the stairs to the next house. I tried again, asking, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded, but didn't say anything. I figured he just wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I stopped trying. We carried on for the next 15 minutes, but suddenly my kids came up to me and said they wanted to go home. This surprised me, as we hadn't been out for too long and their bags were only a third full. In any case, I agreed, waved goodbye at the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing is that when I glanced back at the man and his daughter, they were just standing there staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So, who's that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently, the girl with the cardboard mask approached them and said she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join us to trick or treat and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next chilled me to the bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so she was able to see her face. As it turns out, she wasn't a girl at all, but an older woman around my age with wrinkles in her face. What's even more disturbing, the old woman has started to steal treats from my daughter's bag. Apparently, when I wasn't looking, this is why they asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out, and they wanted to just get away from her. I brought my kids home and told my wife what happened. We made sure to check through all their candies, but didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything since nothing really happened, but thinking back, I kinda regret that decision now. What the heck was that old woman doing? And who the hell was that man following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. I just think it's sick that there are people out there on Halloween hiding behind a mask pretending to be children.